consumer. But let's get back to the Chinese tourist, the Chinese consumer. I think you have to first completely step back and realize what the build-up of the Chinese society is like. And you have to realize that still about half of the people are still living in rural areas. And the other half of the people are living in the cities. But a very substantial part of the people that are living in the cities are actually migrant workers. They came from the countryside and they moved mostly to the East Coast to work in factories, to work as a courier for nowadays for e-commerce companies, to work in restaurants, to work in construction. So they are often lesser paid and they don't have a lot of education, so they don't have any high educated skills, but they live together in those cities with the middle class. And that's mostly the people you will be meeting as Chinese tourists, especially the ones that are quite wealthy. These are mainly the people that will be the Chinese tourists, and they will be the ones that you will be meeting. Those migrant workers, by the way, send quite a lot of the money they earn back home to their families in the countryside. So you see that this urbanization is also increasing the average income in China. This is what is going to happen in the next decade until 2030 with the number of households in the cities, the number of urban households that will rise above 300. And what you see is that urbanization in China drives the gaining of wealth, the gaining of affluence, because the two gray bars are middle income and affluent people. So what we will be seeing as a result of that urbanization is people that earn more and will also be spending more. And one of the ways they will be spending their money is on tourism. This is the expectation for the coming years. So in 2005, the average income in China was about 10,000 renminbi on an annual basis, and that will increase to more than 100,000. So tenfold increase in only 15 years. So that has an enormous impact on the world in various ways, but we will specifically be talking about tourism today. Another thing that is very important to realize, and which a lot of people are not aware of, is that the composition of the Chinese society is very different from what we see in a Western society. Normally in a Western society, what you see here are a couple of graphs from the United States, and this is the income per age group. Now normally, teenagers and young people in their early 20s don't have a lot of money to spend because they are still studying. That's why you see that the average income in this group is relatively low. When they come on the labor market and they get their first job, their income starts to rise until it sort of flattens out around 35, 40, and it decreases a bit by the time they get retired. This is a normal division of income in Western societies. If you look at the Chinese society, it's completely different. You see that the affluence is mostly with the young people and not so much with the elder generations. Anybody have any idea why that is the case in China? Are you aware of the Cultural Revolution? Yeah? So you've heard of the Cultural Revolution, and one of the effects of the Cultural Revolution is they abolished high-level study. So the people from these generations, they haven't had the chance to learn any skills. So they are mostly lower-skilled people. And as a result, most of them don't have a very well-paid job. Whereas these people, the younger generation, the millennials, they have had the chance to study again. Because the universities came back at the end of the 70s. A lot of Chinese students have had the chance to study outside of China. And that has raised their income, in combination with the urbanization I showed you, very dramatically. So it's the young people in China that have the money, and it's the older people that have the time, because they retire quite early compared to our society. Some people, if you are female and you're 50 years old, depending on what kind of job you do, you can already retire. So that's why you see a lot of Chinese tour groups of elder women that are visiting different countries. An important factor in in understanding the Chinese. Now, when they gain more income, and this is a piece of research by Goldman Sachs, what they want to do is they want to do the same thing when we get more money. We want to look better, we want to have better clothing, we want to look... There's a lot of plastic surgery going on in China, for instance. They want to eat better, they want a better home, more mobility, have more fun, they want to be healthier, and they want more luxury. And especially more fun and luxury is where the need for tourism comes from. They want to see the world. But before they go and see the world, they normally first see their own country. There's a lot to see in China. But the disadvantage in China is that Chinese people only have a few holidays, and they all have them at the same time, in the national holidays. So I made the mistake twice, as you can see in this picture, to visit a Chinese site on a national holiday. This is with the Qingming Festival, the Tomb Sweeping Festival. And I went to Badaling, piece of the Great Wall very near to Beijing. But I wasn't the only person, and it was very hard to see any piece of the wall again. I made the same mistake again on Dragon Boat Festival. Went to the Leshan Buddha. You might have seen that in pictures. There's that big stone Buddha that is sitting by the river. This is where you can walk down and up again. And it took about 4 hours to get in line and to wait until you could walk down. So this is what is happening when Chinese people are visiting their own country, especially on those days. So also, if you want to visit China, do it outside of those national holidays, because it's not much fun. If you look at the money that is spent, the money that is spent on outbound travel is already more than on inbound travel, because, of course, foreign travel is more expensive than travel in your own country, whether it's short distance or long distance. But if you then realize that currently only 9% of the Chinese people have a passport, but they are already spending about $200 billion outside, you can understand what the potential is that is still going to come in the next coming years. Don't be fooled, though, by this figure of 9% of the people that only have a passport, because a Chinese person only gets himself a passport when he needs to leave the country for business or for tourism. Because inside China, they have an ID card, and you really don't need a passport to get around in China. So only when they travel outside the borders, they get themselves a passport. So once again, this is what we can expect for the coming years. This is already what's been happening between 1995 and 2014. This is the spend per country. So this is United States, Germany, United Kingdom on tourism. This is what's been happening in the last decade in China. And this is only the beginning, because this is the expectation of what's going to happen. There's about 70 million outbound journeys at the moment, and the expectation is that in 2021 it will have crossed the 100 million mark. This is excluding Hong Kong and Macau, because in some statistics Hong Kong and Macau are not calculated as a foreign trip. But if you calculate these as well, in 2015 it was 120 million outbound trips, and it will be 220 million outbound trips by 2025. So if you now walk around Brugge or Amsterdam or Antwerp or Brussels and you think, oh, there's quite a lot of Chinese people here, this is only the start, because it's going to get much and much more crowded. Fortunately, we're not the first item on their list, because what they do, as we do as well, when you start traveling, you first visit the countries that are nearer to you, because it is less expensive, it takes less effort. So they go to Hong Kong, they go to Macau, and Thailand is a very popular destination for Chinese people. And South Korea, there's been a bit of a dip in South Korea, I'll explain in a moment why. Japan, Taiwan, so it's mostly the East Asia and the Southeast Asia region where Chinese tourists are traveling to. And then you get finally France, not at the moment, a bit less popular, and you get Germany and the rest of Europe. So the expectations, again, the rise will be mainly in numbers, will be in Macau, Southeast Asia, and then in Europe. But if you look at the total rise, then you will realize that even if you in Belgium or in Holland get a piece of the action, a piece of the cake, then it's substantial business potential. This is what's been happening in the last couple of years. The line on the top is the number of Chinese visitors to the Netherlands, and the line at the bottom is to Belgium. The reason why there's sort of a trend break here mainly has to do with safety concerns by the Chinese tourist. Of course, you're aware of the terrorist attacks that have been taking place, not just in Belgium, but also in France, also in Spain, in the UK. And especially because a lot of Chinese tourists have like a package tour, and they feel very unsafe to travel to Europe. Fortunately, that sense of unease goes away quite quickly, within 6 to 12 months, as long as nothing happens again. So those things have a very, very large impact on the Chinese travel. But still, if this continues, the expectation is that, for instance, in the Netherlands, 500,000 people will be traveling to the Netherlands, 500,000 Chinese will be traveling to the Netherlands in 2022, and 800,000 in 2025. So, again, get ready for this. Where are they going? Most of them stay in Amsterdam. Some of them move throughout the country in the Netherlands. They probably go down here to Limburg because there's an outlet store which they visit. I don't think that they all will stay a long time in Maastricht. And on average, they only stay 1.5 days in Belgium and in the Netherlands. The division between group travel and independent travel is also starting to change. What you see here is that individual travel is starting to get a larger share of the total travel amount. You will hear this a lot in the press also and in articles about Chinese tourists, but don't be fooled, because both of these market segments, both individual travel and package travel, are still growing very dramatically, as you can see here. So don't think that there's no future market in group travel for Chinese. The profile of those people that are in a group travel or are traveling independently is very different, though. You could almost compare it to the graph I showed you with the age and the income division, where the free independent traveler are young people. They are educated, they have better English skills. All of them will have had English in their university studies. Does not necessarily mean that their English is very good, and they are also very shy to use it. Yesterday we had somebody and she was telling us that whenever she approached them and she asked them a question, they never answer her. And that's probably not because they're rude, but because they are too shy to actually use the English they have learned. They are very confident in using self-service, book their own trips and book it through online travel agencies, or completely design their own trip, and they use social media a lot. Like I said, they are the generation that has the money, while the elder people have the time. So they save up, and they might 1 or twice in their lives go on a trip to Europe, while these try to go every year. 60% of the Chinese tourists, about 40%. On the other side, like I said, it's mostly, especially when they are retired, it's quite often large groups of elder women, 50 plus. They are not very well educated. They most of the time have no English skills whatsoever, but they come with a tour guide, and the tour guide plays the role of interpreter and communication with people in the Netherlands and in Belgium. 60% of these people still book through traditional offline travel agencies. And like I said, they are the ones that have most of the time. So a very different profile. These are extremes, but most of the people you could sort of group in these two categories. Those millennials, the post-80s, post-90s, already take up 60% of the tourists, while they are only 25% of the population. So a very interesting group to take into account. The MBTC, this is an organization that promotes tourism and conferences in the Netherlands. They've done some very interesting research where they created personas, marketing personas, on how you should communicate with different groups of Chinese tourists. I'm not going to show it here in this presentation, but we'll include it in the links in the email. And it's very interesting to have a look at that, because it gives you more understanding about their needs, their drives, the reasons why they take certain decisions. And it's all packaged like around a specific person they created as a persona. So do have a look at that. Another interesting thing is the question, what makes the Chinese tourist tick? What are their considerations when they pick a destination? And the most important consideration for a Chinese tourist is safety. They are much more aware and much more influenced by news about safety of a location, where we might think, okay, there are terrorist attacks, but what are the chances of getting caught in a terrorist attack? There are very little. But still, we also don't travel to countries where there might be a civil war or something else going on. But the Chinese people are much more sensitive to this. Also because in the Chinese press, it is often used, trouble in other countries, to emphasize how well they have it in their own country. Environmental, I'm not quite sure what they meant with that in this C-trip research. This is a clear one. Convenient flights and visas is an important one. But also, how friendly are the people towards Chinese if I want to travel there? Price and exchange rates is only number 5 in their set of considerations. So it's much more, if you do marketing to Chinese, it's very important to show that we welcome them and it's a safe place to visit. What other things are influencing them? One of the first things they do is they look at travel websites. Travel websites, booking sites, and friend recommendations all have to do with the opinions of their peers, opinions of other people that have traveled somewhere. They are very sensitive and they are very much influenced by other people's opinions, much more than the opinions in advertising and the travel agencies themselves. It also is true the other way around, because Chinese people write a lot of travel reviews. At one hand, they do that because they also use them themselves, so it's like a way of returning the favor. But it's also because showing your family and your friends and your guanxi, showing them that you're able to travel to all of those different places and how much fun you have, gives them mianzi, gives them face and respect and status. So that's why social media are also very important for them, to show all of the people around them where they've been. And that's why 42% of all travel reviews online are written by Chinese people. And I can assure you that it's not 42% of all tourists are Chinese. So it's an exceptionally high number that you see here. Another important influence on tourism is movies. So there's been a couple of movies in the recent years, and those free independent travelers, they go and see the movies in different theaters. So they go to movies like Lost in Thailand, which takes place in Thailand, and you immediately see a boom of the number of people that are traveling to Thailand. Or Finding Mr. Right, which takes place in Seattle. So Chinese people all of a sudden all want to see Seattle. Or in this case, Somewhere Only We Know is taking place in Prague and has created a boost to the number of Chinese people visiting Prague. And currently you have the animation movie by Disney and Pixar, Coco. And it's a movie that is taking place in Mexico. And it's even an animation movie, but it's created so much interest in the last couple of weeks that travel agencies in China have seen an 80% rise in the interest in Mexican destinations already. On the other hand, you also have a negative influence. The Chinese government often uses pressure on other countries, political pressure, by using the trump card of tourism. So, for instance, when you have a conflict in the South China Sea, then you could see that Duterte from the Philippines all of a sudden cozies up to somebody like Xi Jinping because he wants that tourism business back. And he'll say to Xi Jinping, those conflicts in the South China Sea, even though we started the whole business in the international court, let's not talk about that anymore because we would like to have those tourists back. Or if the United States places defense missiles in South Korea, and the Chinese government says to Chinese travel agents, you're no longer allowed to book trips to South Korea because we want to pressure them, that's a complete destruction of the Chinese tourism business to South Korea, which is only now slowly picking up again. I want to close with a couple of other trends before I hand over to Bart. We have seen the temporary effect of terrorism. You also see more group incentive travel, where employers take all of their employees on trips. You might have heard about a couple of cases where there were thousands of Chinese people that all of a sudden went to Europe. It's been in the news, I think 2 years ago. So this is getting more and more often used, although not in such extreme groups. You see a shift from the interest in group travel and shopping towards more individual travel and more experience. It doesn't mean that Chinese people don't like to shop anymore, but the experience of the travel is getting more important than it has been in the past. More personalized services is related to that. Improved behavior, I will get back to that later. The spreading of holidays, like I said, the Chinese government is looking into ways to spread out when people take their holidays. So that will probably lead to less extreme peaks in Chinese tourism in the coming years. And very important, a silver wave. And the silver wave basically is all of the older Chinese people that are going to travel. And we've already seen it in those groups, but a lot of them are also traveling independently or with their close family. And that's now already 20% share of the market, and it will grow by 30%. Why will it grow like 30%? And this is my last slide I'm going to show you. Again, it has to do with the composition of the Chinese society. This is what the society looked like in the 1950s. Very few older people, because it was a very poor country. And especially during the Great Leap Forward, a lot of people were dying from starvation. So a lot of people didn't end up being very old. And so most of the people were quite young as well. This is the composition now, and this is what it will look like in a couple of decades, because a lot of people will be growing old, and there's not enough refreshment of young people also in the labor market because of the one-child policy. There's an extreme unbalance taking place, but at the same time it also means that a large group of Chinese tourists will be older people that will be more affluent because they are part of the current urbanization that will be also traveling to our countries.